Hi, I'm Jennifer Campbell, creator and host of the Systemic Leadership Summit. Welcome to this session, and today we are going to talk about what it's like to integrate relationship systems intelligence as a leader. We'll explore what it means for a leader in business to actually work with a systemic approach in their role. My guest for today is someone who went on this exact journey, moving from a more traditional leadership style to systemic leadership. And he's here to share from his experience, and his name is Klaus Lombardozzi. Klaus is a passionate leader with over 20 years of experience in both medium-sized organizations and global corporations such as Transcom Worldwide and Shell. He works with teams in different roles and various industries in both Europe and South Africa. Klaus has many years of experience in change and project management, being responsible for various startup operations, which he successfully transitioned to business as usual operations. His years of experience include numerous change management initiatives covering organizational design and effectively taking people through several restructuring projects. Klaus always sets out to create a resilient culture of collaboration, empowerment, inclusiveness, and accountability towards set goals. In addition to his leadership and change experience, Klaus is also an internationally CRR Global certified organizational and systems coach. This certification equips him to support teams of all sizes to be emotionally intelligent, innovative, collaborative, and positive, allowing them to navigate change successfully, to get unstuck during conflict, and achieve set goals and targets. A part to this international coaching certificate, Klaus is also trained in time to think and crucial conversations. And these both allow him to assist teams in thinking and contributing creatively and having constructive conversations about topics that keep them stuck. His passion for excellence drives him to continue learning in the space of enabling leadership and coaching. In his spare time, Klaus loves spending time with his wife and his 3 teenage boys, and finds balance in long mountain trail runs, which the Cape has many to offer. So I would like to extend a very warm welcome to you, Klaus. Thank you so much for being with us in the Systemic Leadership Summit.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Oh, let's start. Let's dive into our conversation today about your leadership journey. And I'd like to start off with you in your leadership role or roles that you fulfilled up until this point in your career. Could you share with us, where did this journey start for you as a leader?
I mean, so I have a very introverted background, and I naturally didn't see myself as a leader, really. But then how life goes, serendipity had it that I ended up working in a contact center because I was in Europe for a while and I needed a job, so I ended up in a contact center. And well, I'm quite a curious person, and I started working on a couple of things to just make the team work better together, like a reward and recognition program and stuff like that, and trying to work out some different scheduling for people and how they can come to work and stuff like that. And so then, I found myself, being promoted to team leader. And I had a lot of good feedback from working with teams at that stage. And then I naturally grew to take on bigger leadership roles with a broader responsibility. So it was more, I think, via serendipity that I got into a leadership role. And I think my curiosity and my urge to continuously develop myself fitted well into being a leader, because it's an unending road. both the development and being a good leader. Yeah.
And so what I find so fascinating is that in the beginning you said, I come from an introverted background. What prompted you to say that?
I think it's a good question. I think I say it because I think there's still a bit of what makes a good leader cliche out there. Mm-hmm. And naturally, I think big leaders, also leaders in big corporations and stuff like that, are quite extroverted, robust, go-getters. And I think I say that because I think people that are introverts don't necessarily would reach out to take on a leadership role and working with large amounts of people.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. So what did that mean then for you when you were taking on leadership roles? Did you feel like you needed to be this extroverted, go-getting type of leader, or did you take a different route?
I think the mix that I brought to it was most probably a lot to do with my introverted style. And I think what made a big difference is also the line managers that I had along the route. So some of them, endorsed and encouraged in who I was and my own leadership style and saw the benefits of that. And some others urged me on to be more robust, direct and driven in my outer persona as a leader. Yeah, but I think there's always a bit of a challenge. I think we still live in a very male thinking. Leadership in male is synonymous, and it's often to do not with feelings, not being sensitive, and so I think that always created a bit of a tension in me. Yeah.
Okay. Could you share more about that? Because what's so important, and also for everyone who's watching, to see what the challenges were for you as a leader when you started up taking these roles. So what were they for you? And they can be text-related, context-related, or more internally, like you just mentioned. So what were the challenges for you?
Is your question specifically around leadership in general, or is it from a systemic point of view?
Well, we haven't moved into the systemic just yet, because it's really about that onset point. Where did you find yourself as a leader before moving into the systemic? And one is that you just mentioned, like, I'm more introverted. There's more this pull to be more extroverted and directive. Also male-dominated type of thinking that you just mentioned. So maybe there were more challenges like that, or more in the work context that pulled you towards a particular type of leadership style.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I can illustrate it with an example. Is that I took over an operation that was underperforming, and for me, the focus was absolutely on building trust as a primary foundation before we go in and performance manage people and do the typical get rid of the 10% or whatever it is. And I pursue to implement something called time to think, which is really about creating an environment where that sets people up to think clearly.
Yeah.
And that builds a lot of trust. And I think we were about halfway through when there was a lot of feedback about this being far too soft, and a more driven, performance-focused approach was needed. And so we abandoned the well, we officially abandoned the project about getting people more connected.
So who gave you this feedback, may I ask? Were those your superiors or your peers? Yes, or your...
no, absolutely superiors, yeah.
So here you were driving an operation in a particular direction, and you had your approach, which was to build trust through time to think, and you were overruled, basically, then. Pulled into the older, more performance-driven, get-it-done type of style.
Exactly.
What was that like for you to experience that?
I think frustrating in a lot of sense. I mean, we continued with the principles, and without making it an official agenda, just because. Well, we work with people, and people don't go away even if we want to focus on something else.
Yeah, true.
But yeah, I think frustrating, disappointing. It made it quite difficult to bring a change where you knew that the change was at a different level than just where the nuts and bolts and the linear thinking intends to go.
Yeah. So this is so interesting, and I'm sure that there's many leaders out there who can relate. It also makes me think of one of my clients who is in the exact spot where you just described yourself a while back. Where they feel this pressure all the time, this pressure to perform, and that there's pressure not in terms of what they need to deliver, but also how they need to deliver it. And that's a theme that I hear with you, isn't it? In this example.
Yeah. I think organizations often talk about empowerment, and what I feel in a lot of cases that it's wanting people to feel empowered to do what they need to do, not necessarily to be who they are. And I think pressure just has a huge impact on organizations, and I think it usually trickles through the leadership on how pressure is either managed or not managed.
Yeah.
So if it's just one way into the organization and not managed or buffered by leaders, then the repercussions are really heavy on the organization, and that just things like collaboration, inclusiveness, really being empowered, working on some of the softer elements just disappear.
Right. Yeah. And so what I hear from you is that you were already inclined more towards the, as you call them, the softer elements of leadership that are also very important for people, especially when they are transitioning, especially when they need to perform, especially when situations become difficult, or when people really need to step up. That you were looking into empowerment and trust and inclusiveness more than the space that you were given to actually execute that, to actually work with that. So those were the challenges you faced as a leader. Yeah. And so today we're talking about the shift that you made, and where you started integrating more relationship systems intelligence into your leadership style. And could you share with us, from that place of all the challenges that you had, how did you get to know about a more systemic approach? How did that work for you?
Yeah, so for specifically the ORSC's approach, I mean, it kind of came to me through my wife, who's also a coach.
So just for everyone who's watching, ORSC stands for Organization and Relationship Systems Coaching. That's the approach you're talking about. Because you and I know, but many people may not be as familiar with that as you and I are.
Yes, so very good. So the systemic approach is really a sort of systemic approach that I've been trained, and the foundation for me is organizational relationship systems coaching from the Center of Right Relationships. So it found its way through my wife. And just reading through the approach, I've for many years I've been a big fan of Arnold Modell and process-oriented psychology. And being in South Africa, I've always struggled really to find somebody who trains it, who's active in it. There isn't much, although Arnold Modell himself has done work here many years ago. And I just read it, and it was just like, wow, finally it has landed on my desk.
So did you read an article or online or?
Yeah, it was actually just that the course was taking place in South Africa. So the fundamentals was taking place, and just highlighting the advanced series and just reading more up on it in CRO Global. It just absolutely resonated with me for what was done.
Do you recall what resonated most with you? What were the things that you read where you thought, wow, that really hits home for me?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was just grappling with that myself. It's a little bit like sometimes I when something resonates with me so deeply, then I don't question it enough. I kind of just go with my gut. But I think in the principle that we're human beings and we all are unique, and by hearing all the different voices, we gain insights into what's happening and what can we do about it that we otherwise do not have. And I specifically like the aspects of working with the emotional field. So looking at really talking about the emotions that sit in the dynamic and not just the content. Okay,
so just to grab that and to look at an example. So the emotional field. So you're a leader. You're doing your work. Perhaps you're in a meeting. What would then the emotional field look like? So it's not the content. How would you describe it further? For example, in a setting of a meeting, what does that look like?
Yeah. So I'm also a person that likes structure, and so I kind of sometimes sit between having the right structure for a meeting, and I think historically everything was about the structure and getting through the agenda.
Yeah.
Specifically, the last year I've been busy with a big change journey with Shell, where we're through a strategic review, the custom operations in Cape Town was closed, which meant that for the 250 people involved, it means all their jobs became redundant.
Wow.
That happened simultaneously with my certification in ORSC. And a typical meeting would be really just a round of finding out what's in the room, before we go into any content. And sometimes, when specific subjects came up, there needed just to be some venting and to give specifically the leadership team that doesn't have a venting space really with their teams, needed a space where venting can happen.
Right. So venting is expression of how you are or how you feel?
Yeah, just people expressing maybe some frustration or even disagreement with something, or just talking about the stuff that they find challenging in teams. Just really giving space for all that to come out. And I found in the same meeting time, with that out of the way, work can get done much easier afterwards than with this emotional charge sitting in the room and working through the content is really a slog. Who knows why?
Yeah. Well, this is. Thank you for sharing this example, because it's so. It's something that we all know. If you're if you have strong feelings around something and you sit in a meeting and it's somehow connected to our ears being open or closed, you cannot access the content really well if you're frustrated about something or if you're emotional about something. So working with the emotional field, as one of the things that you learned in the ORSC certification and the training, is that it actually helped you and your leadership team be more effective with the content after giving it space in terms of the emotional field.
Yeah, for me it was really like a little bit like you were saying, Jennifer. It's always there. It's just about like opening the awareness and acknowledging that it's there and the impact that it has on team and the content. Yeah. And my experience at the beginning, it was a little bit like holding a piece of slippery soap. It kind of, because the default isn't really to focus on that. And very intentionally, I would go into meetings and say, okay, remind myself about, okay, what's happening in the emotional field? What's happening in the emotional field? And then it just slips away, and after the meeting you think like, oh, I had it, I lost it. and it's just going back in and practicing it and practicing it and practicing it. So it's such a huge amount of information that sits in that emotional field. Yeah. And just not having it, I mean, I see it with other leaders, just not having it. It becomes all about doing and getting done.
So there's a pressure again.
So extremely enriching a piece of information. And I would almost say that, content follows emotional field. And the working climate is just completely dependent on it.
Yeah. It reminds me of what you mentioned earlier, like we are all human. Yeah. And stepping over something like emotions is almost like trying to push away all the human and just to get to the content bit. But actually it's counterproductive if I hear it from your example.
Yeah, I must say I sit here and I cringe a little bit to think that how many meetings I've sat in where I haven't been aware of the emotional field, and reflecting on it afterwards, it seems like so painfully obvious. And it's a crazy reminder that we have to remind ourselves that everybody who comes to work is a human being, and we all have emotions, and we have lives, and we matter. And, back to what we said earlier on about organizational pressure, that organizational pressure can just absolutely blind us to that. And the demand is about numbers, and the demand is about delivery, and in the speed of all of that, we get that very, very basic aspect that we've all come to work as human beings.
Yeah, and what I also hear is that from the examples that you shared, is that you were trying to create more space and time to think. And even though you weren't given a lot of space on the project, it is something that you allowed for yourself so that you could build the muscle of working with the emotional field, something that you learned in the ORSC approach.
Yeah.
So, what I'm getting from your journey right now is that it does require that you reflect on, how do I do this? How do I incorporate this in my leadership role when I'm leading a meeting, or and how does that benefit everyone here, especially my leadership team, if they don't have another space? Obviously, in that particular project, other employees did have some space, or space was facilitated or organized, but not for your team to do venting, and then after that to move to the context and the content. What else would you like to highlight from your journey in applying this systemic approach in your leadership?
For me, it was always really about, so how do I show up, and it's a way of being. I think taking a systemic approach is really, I don't know, maybe a little bit exaggerated, but it shifts our DNA. I mean, it's fundamentally acknowledging the whole picture and how everything interconnects, and that we have an interconnected part. So it's the team and me, and it's the team and the individual. And it's an ongoing journey for me about reminding myself that there's more that matters than my own view. And even when I'm extremely convinced that I'm right and I can put all the facts on the table, it does not matter. It's not the whole thing. It's just really a snippet of the whole story. And that's really taught me to kind of lean in and be more curious about what else is there,
So let's stay with this one for a while, because I know that you want to mention two things. So hang on to the second one for a moment, because I find this point extremely important. Because you say, it's not all about me. It's not all about if I'm right, even if I can back it up. Because that is the place where so many people in general, but leaders specifically, were trained to be. It's all about me as a leader. I need to know it all. And so how did you do that? How did you shift to a place where you can ask, what else is there besides my direction and opinion, and especially in a leadership role?
It's a good question, and I can only give a very personal response to it, because it's very much an internal aspect, and I would consider myself lucky enough to have an internal niggling voice that perpetually and relentlessly reminds me that maybe it's really from a heart space point of view that there is a softer way of showing up, of working with people, of treading on this earth, and that kind of intrinsically knows that we're all interconnected and interdependent as well. And I'd also say that I've been lucky enough to have that voice loud enough to kind of get my attention. And I think, I think that's really, you kind of, inside of me, there was this constant reminder that wouldn't let me go. And I almost want to say that to anybody who's on the summit is that if you're here and that means that there's a part of you that's curious about this, go check that out and build that relationship with that aspect, because it holds something really valuable that we need to learn to honor. Yeah.
I love how you say that, to build a strong relationship with that part inside of you, and cultivate it, because exactly there is a reason why people are watching this, while everyone who is here witnessing us in this conversation, there is something that triggers. And if it does, your calling is to say, okay, cultivate that, because that's going to help you look into the bigger space beyond yourself, beyond the I need to know it all leadership style.
Yeah. And when we look at things from a systemic point of view, we're also a system, and there's different voices in our system. From all different stages of our lives and influences in our lives, who's getting most of the attention, or who's not getting any attention. And I think it's good that we pick up clues along the way, like we've just said, that there's something that attracts you to the summit. Lean into that and figure out what is that voice, and how much airtime are you giving it, and how can it find a place around the table with all the other voices? Some of which might have been dominating in the past, and that's, I think, if I look at myself, I think you look at towards your culture and your upbringing and your schooling to look at, okay, where's the standard? And so we default to a standard that we've learned, but unfortunately for our times, it's not necessarily the most helpful standard. Right.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Something just clicked for me when you mentioned that, and that is, we as human beings, and specifically also as leaders, we learn by example, and we grow up in systems, and we move in systems, our family systems, our education systems, our first job environments, work environments, that all inform us about, okay, what is supposedly the best approach here. And maybe those dominating aspects or voices or ways of dealing with and shaping leadership are not necessarily the ones that are going to help you in the setting where you are now. Fulfill a leadership role, or what's needed in your organization or in the plane where you fulfill your leadership role. So thank you for that. It's a profound thing, because we all want to also belong to our systems. We want to fit in. We want to do the right thing. But what is generally thought of as the right thing may not be what is required or what is needed in the space.
Yeah. I think that's such a good question to ask. How helpful is this approach? I mean, a lot of organizations are again under pressure, and then one leader says to the other one, "I need you to sort this out." And, well, the leader takes that literally, that they are responsible for sorting it out, and everybody else gets told what to do, with the sole responsibility sitting on the leader, versus a systemic approach where the leader would say, "Guys, this is what's happening in the team. This is the performance. I need to understand what's happening. What are some of the views? How can we go about this?" And listening to all the different voices, which actually gives the leader much more information to make that decision on, and actually, and this is from my own experience, makes leading so much more easier. It's a massive relief actually to realize, like, okay, so there's 20 of us, not like, oh my God, I've got 20 people reporting to me and I've got to get them all to do what they need to do, but like, hey, there's 20 other people that are thinking here. Let me go find out what they're thinking and feeling.
Yeah.
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 Well, there's so many different follow-up questions I have just from this bit that you mentioned. There's 20 other people who are thinking here. And when I flip that around, it's like, okay, if a leader shapes his or her role as I need to know it all, that may be an invitation for others to stop thinking because they're not asked about what they're thinking.
Absolutely.
So that's one. Two, you said it makes your role also lighter from your experience. And that's a nice counterbalance when you're dealing with the pressure. So that's also interesting in terms of, I would almost call benefits of moving towards the systemic more. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
What other benefits would you like to share about? Because in the beginning there were two things you wanted to mention, and you mentioned one.
Yeah. I think the other one that I wanted to mention was really this. I think using the word command and control is often what we affiliate with strong leaders. And there's personality types that buy into the command and control because it feels comfortable for them, and they see a lot of practical benefit in it and wouldn't want to do anything else. From that mindset, working with the emotional field can often feel very chaotic, and that experience can feel quite uncomfortable for leaders that are more tuned to the command and control piece, and it can actually be threatening to those leaders. So I think what I want to say is that shifting into a more systemic leadership style in an existing organization, where it's not a top-down thing, but you're in there, out there somewhere, knowing that you want to change.
Yeah.
Expect people to potentially raise their eyebrows at what you're doing. When you're tapping into the emotional field and start speaking about, okay, so there's a lack of trust here, or people are feeling fragile, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
To acknowledge that aspects, which makes people really feel heard. That some of those command and control leaders were thinking like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
We've got a meeting here and we need a plan in place, and this certainly doesn't look like anything like that at all. Yeah. So I think,
like in the Exemplary project you mentioned earlier in our conversation, where they just said, oh, well, we need to have a more controlled, performance-driven approach. Yeah. And no, we do not want to give time to think. We just want to act. And and as I mentioned, the last 12 months I spent closing the operation, which means that last year in May we announced to everybody about the closure, and the biggest risk on the risk matrix, top right hand side, is deterioration of service in the contact center, which is a logical thing to worry about. Yeah.
And I believe that my systemic approach over the last 12 months, although we focused obviously on delivery and how we're doing with delivery and stuff like that, being in touch with what's happening in the emotional field and connecting with people around that, the feedback from the organization was just that the project was amazingly well delivered. Everybody committed to doing what needed to be done. That was never the question. We never focused on, we're not getting this thing done, get this thing done, these are the things we need to get done today. We focused I mean, we focus on the project plan, but we focus massively on the emotional field. Mm-hmm. And my reflection on it is that if we're connected on the emotional field, that the work gets done.
Yeah. Okay.
It's done. Nobody's coming to work to not get the work done. And you know, I think we worry sometimes too much, and the pressure is we worry that work doesn't get done, and then we focus on that the whole time. But we don't ask the question, why is the work not being done? Like, you know,
yeah.
Let's spend some time talking about that.
Yeah, yeah. So just to sum up, in terms of moving into a more systemic leadership style, with the example you just shared, is that you say that some of the could be challenges, or could at least be an impact, is that when you start doing that, when you go into the emotional field, or when you create more space to think, or when you read into what's going on for everyone, and spend more time on that, that people who are more control-based or control-focused may frown or even feel threatened, or feel like the work does not get done. But when you actually have and create the space to do this, in the end, the entire organization is able to move forward so much quicker with the work that needs to be done, and that it was very well led. And so what you're telling me is that focusing on getting it done doesn't necessarily speed up the process of getting it done.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. And I mean, the project that I spoke about, well, we finished it a month early. And it was a massive project with lots of risks. So that's certainly my experience. I think the other thing from a systemic point that I really appreciated and helped me tremendously is, and it's conceptual at first, but when one applies it, it becomes very realistic. It's really about sitting back and thinking like, okay, listening into what's happening in the system. Mm-hmm. And kind of also using myself. So in this case, I was also impacted, but using my own emotional experience as a voice of the system. And if I felt a lot of anxiety, is to then talk about anxiety in the system, because if there is anxiety in the system, if there's anxiety for me, there'll be anxiety for the system. You know, I'm only a reflection of the system and vice versa.
Okay.
And often that was extremely helpful, just especially as the most senior leader, to be able to say, I'm feeling anxious about these things. Who else is feeling anxious about these things? And then to let that be the conversation topic. It almost, as a senior leader, gives permission to speak about it. Funny scenario. So we did a round with the leadership team, how are you doing? Going around, and I was lost. And so I said, well, I just really feel exhausted. I'm struggling to focus on things, I'm a little bit all over the place and stuff like that. And the whole room just packed up laughing. And they said, oh, permission to speak. And then everybody just let rip.
Is that because they resonated so much with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, everybody gave almost like a PC answer, politically correct answer, like a very, we're in a formal meeting kind of response. And that really taught me to say, like, wow, I really pulled the cork out from underneath that. All that emotional energy that was sitting there.
Yeah. So let me just sum up this, because I find this such an important piece of what you're sharing. You're actually saying, what's going on inside you while you're moving into the system, while you're fulfilling your leadership role, is something that you then share in the bigger space, And then you ask the question, who else is feeling that? Or there is space for others to respond to you and say, oh, I also feel it like that. And I find it so important because in this round, you were last. And everybody was doing politically correct answers. Now imagine what would have happened if you would have gone first.
Exactly.
And I can imagine that it's quite daunting for many leaders who are taking up the senior leadership position, especially when you're sitting with your leadership team. But it's about trusting what comes from the inside. That's what I say you do. You trust what is inside. Oh, I feel anxious. Oh, I'm exhausted. Oh, I'm probably not the only one. It's in the system. If it's in me, it's also in the bigger team. It's also in my organization. Oh, let me go and find out. And that's just a total 360 of what many leaders are used to. They don't go inside. They don't see their own emotions as a reflection of what is going on in the bigger plane. And there's certainly no room to talk about it. And the content is key and on the table. And if we do touch upon it, we go the politically correct way. And so that's why I'm pausing you here, because it's so important to get this. This is such a different approach. And so it's really important to understand the benefits and the space you create for everyone else in your team in this example of what that does. So could you speak to that a little bit more? What happened afterwards when everybody just let it rip?
Well, I mean, it's really the point around, being a bit chaotic for 10 minutes and knowing, not being worried about, oh my God, is this meeting going to the dogs, but knowing that this is what is needed and letting the 10 minutes happen. And then there's space for coming back to the agenda and working through the material. But I think also what you said earlier on, Jennifer, around realizing that how you show up makes such a big impact. And one of the things that we look at in organizational relationship systems coaching is meta skills, which is actually an Amy Mandel originated this term.
Yeah. And for everyone who's watching, we've had a session with Amy on the summit, where I talk to her about that. So more there too on meta skills. But what did you do with meta skills?
So it's really about intentionally thinking about, how am I going to show up and how helpful is that as the leader? How can I, what kind of climate can I create that'll help the situation? And then picking meta skills, if that's heart or inquiry or collaboration or curiosity or any of aspect, and one can make those up. They're not a limited set of them. But intentionally moving into a meeting or a space and showing up in a certain way is extremely helpful. I benefited of intentionally picking meta skills, and I still do massively. And just knowing that one can pick these, and we can mentally and physically attune ourselves to a meta skill and move in that space is massively helpful for leaders, I think.
So hang on. So earlier you shared about the emotional field, and that you were really intending to ask about the emotional field, and that you said, oh, I had it and I had it. Oh, here I missed it. Here I had it again. Is that the same thing? It's about the intention of being curious about the emotional field. or it's the intention of really wanting to hear all voices, like you mentioned earlier, or the intention to, and to deliberately step into that. Mm-hmm. It's a mental mindset or decision that you make, that you come from.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
It's exactly what I mean, and I think you point exactly at the pivotal aspect of it, which is about being intentional. Mm-hmm. And I think that anybody who's moving from whatever leadership style they're in now and to a more systemic one, it's not a plug and play thing.
No.
So the intention needs to be made, the attention needs to be held, and exactly that point about my intention made me aware of something, and then it slipped back into my default, and then I hold my intention again, and I'm aware of it, and I'm working in that space, and it slips away back into my default. That's really a natural process of moving into one's ideal way. So we kind of dream up how we want to be as a leader, mm-hmm. and then the journey starts. Just about reminding oneself and intending and coming back into situations that we all get triggered in certain situations, and other situations are easier to manage. And there's a gazillion of those in a day.
Yeah.
So I think the holding that intention and I think the other one, being kind on oneself. That's even though you've held that intention in the morning, by the afternoon it might have just disappeared.
I love that one. Don't start beating yourself up for not living by your intention 24/7. Yeah. So it's about maybe different words, but what resonates for me is am I on purpose, and can I be compassionate when I'm not? That's also what I hear.
Yeah.
And, so this is about choosing who you want to be as a leader, choosing about how you show up as a leader.
Very much.
Yeah. So it's an inside job and it's an outside job.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's about intention, and it's not about control, because sometimes you find yourself in chaos for 10 minutes at least when you're in the emotional field.
Yeah, it's also to be important that you can't control yourself the whole time. So intentions slip away, and that's normal. It's just as much as we can't control all the factors outside of ourselves, we can't control the factors inside of ourselves. And I think that's where the compassion comes in.
Yeah.
It's, if we are compassionate to what we're experiencing internally, we will be able to have authentic opportunities to express that compassion externally. Yeah. I think if we're beating ourselves up all day long, it's going to be hard for us to be really compassionate on the outside.
Yeah. So, could you share with me, Klaus? We're talking about leadership, and I can imagine that for many people who are watching, and also for me, it really comes very close to home, and also touches upon very personal aspects also. So could you share with us, how did this, because you're fulfilling your leadership role, you're learning about organization and relationship systems, coaching, and you're integrating that into your role. But how did it affect your personal life? How did you affect you personally, how you step into the world?
Yeah, I mean, the challenges and the edges that I cross are similar in my personal life than in my leadership role. And, in my personal life, relationships are much closer. And, with the closer the relationship, the more potential there is for a trigger to be flicked. Maybe just quickly to say that around in when we do our certification in organizational relationship systems coaching, there is a world work project that we're asked to complete, which is really just about, so how do we bring the benefits of this out into the world?
Yeah.
And my world work project, which is still ongoing, is very much about bringing it into my family, and sometimes I have internal parties about, I've had certain conversations and they've just gone beautiful. And sometimes I walk away from conversations where I think, like, man, it was none of what I intended to show up like. So I've got 3 teenage sons. So there's a lot of opinion and testosterone in the house. And I'm, very intentionally aware that these young gentlemen will go out into the world, and how will they show up?
Yeah.
And that I have a very important influencing role for them in their life as their father. Mm-hmm. And that's why it made most sense for me to pick my world work project to be a very personal one. Because I don't want to be a fabulous systemic leader or systemic coach out in the world, and yeah, it would just be completely out of integrity with me to not be that at home. I wouldn't know how to do that. So yeah, the same challenges exist, and I think also the same benefits. Getting different views around the table, if that's about sex, internet, smoking, drinking alcohol, these are all topics that there are very different opinions with 3 teenage boys in the house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really salute you for bringing this into your own space of your family life, and what you also said about, I would be out of integrity to be a fantastic systemic leader out there in the corporate world, and then coming back home and being this whatever traditionally command and control father. So that would not make any sense. And choosing who you want to be and how you want to show up is a bigger choice. It's not just who do I choose to be in as a leader. It's about who do I choose to be, full stop. Yeah. And as I walk through all these different systems that I have a role in, whether it's my family or my business or my community or my sports club or wherever, it's I'm always taking myself with me, and there's always this awareness of the role that you have or the role that you fulfill and the impact you have on the bigger space. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm fortunate enough that my wife's also completed the advanced training in ORSC, so she does hold me to account and mirror for me beautifully.
That's what happens when you have a coach in the house.
Definitely.
Yeah, so a coach and 3 teenage boys.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have one last question for you. And that is, when you looked at all that we talked about, and if you were to say there's one thing or one action or just one approach that the leaders who are watching right now or people in leadership roles who are watching right now could do to move towards the systemic more, or to move into a journey that opens up more possibilities like it opened up for you, and have more benefits of the systemic approach like it did for you? What would that be, in your opinion?
I think asking me to give one is a challenge. Let me see if I can couple two together as one. I think the most important thing is what I mentioned earlier on, is that if you're at the summit and you're curious about it, really find ways of becoming curious about what is that in you that is looking for something different. What disagrees with you about what's currently happening, and what resonates with you in a systemic approach, and really take some time to understand that, so that you can honor it really, and see what space it wants to take up in your life. I think the other one that goes hand in hand with that, which is a constant challenge for me, is slowing down, and that's counterintuitive, and I think in the time that we're in, because everything is speeding up and the pressure is increasing, and we're trying to do more. We're trying to get more out of a way of working that hasn't served us very well so far. So it's a bit of a crazy space we're in. And slowing down just really helps us, first of all, getting in touch with what else wants to emerge within us, but also to become aware of aspects like emotional field and a systemic view and stuff like it. I think when learning a new skill that's so intrinsically different to how we operate in a command and control world, we have to find time in our day to slow down and reflect, and really become in touch with ourselves. So whatever mechanism that is for people, there's magic in slowing down.
Yeah. Klaus, we've come to the end of our conversation, and we've been talking about your journey as an example of what it can look like to integrate relationship systems intelligence into not only your leadership role, where we started off, but also in your life in general, and how you show up as you move through the different systems that you're part of. So I'd like to say thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your examples and your challenges, because I'm sure that it will resonate with many people. So thanks, Klaus, for being on.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. I like sharing the story, and I always get new insights from sharing it with other people. So thanks for giving me the opportunity.
You're welcome. And to everyone who's watching, I'm sure that you enjoyed this session. And if you want to continue the discussion, I invite you to go to our online community space for the Systemic Leadership Summit and take it further. For now, I'd like to say thank you so much for tuning in and watching today. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.